Good afternoon, and welcome to the Lowell Milken Lecture in Jewish Music. This lecture is established to showcase leading scholarship in American Jewish music by highly accomplished scholars. Lowell Milken created the Lowell Milken Archive in 1990 when he perceived an opportunity to preserve and disseminate a body of music that helped shape the American Jewish experience. After assembling an editorial board comprising experts from diverse fields, the archive commenced recording a collection currently comprising 600 pieces of music by roughly 200 composers. The Lowell Milken Lecture is sponsored by the Lowell Milken Center for Music of the American Jewish Experience, a center that I direct, and our center was established here at UCLA in 2020. The center is housed in the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. Our center focuses on three areas of American Jewish music: scholarship, performances, and public programs. All three of our center's goals are encapsulated in our programs this month. Today's lecture by Professor Joy Calico, Schoenberg in Hollywood, and Representations of Jewishness in Opera, is part of our UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music's Schoenberg at 150 activities. On Sunday, we will open a performance of Todd Machover's opera, Schoenberg in Hollywood, which is an intimate portrayal of this famous composer, particularly during his time here in Los Angeles. The Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience has organized 5 public talks in person and on Zoom, and this lecture is the 4th in this series, providing background on Schoenberg and his connection to the creative life of European emigres in Los Angeles. We invite you to our website to see these programs. Today's lecture will particularly address the Jewishness of Schoenberg as portrayed in the opera, and we hope this will urge you to get tickets. Schoenberg in Hollywood will be at the Nimoy Theater here in Westwood. It opens Sunday and runs through May 22nd. And as David mentioned earlier, we'll pass around some of these flyers. You can just scan this QR code, and then you can get free tickets. So I am pleased to announce this free ticket offer, and hope you'll secure your tickets. So now for today's lecture. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker who is delivering the Lowell Milken Lecture in Jewish Music. Professor Joy H. Calico is a musicologist who is a faculty member and chair of the Department of Musicology here at UCLA. Her scholarship focuses on interdisciplinary Cold War cultural politics, opera since 1900, and Arnold Schoenberg. Her current projects include a theory of 20th and 21st century opera according to the scene build type, and I don't even know how to pronounce it. Is it L'Amour?
Love from afar.
Love from Afar, thank you, which is under contract with University of California Press. And a co-edited volume by Oxford University Press entitled Childhood and the Operatic Imaginary Since 1900. In fall 2024, she and Daniel Chua will also launch the California Studies in the Global Musicology book series. She is author of Arnold Schoenberg's A Survivor from Warsaw in Post-War Europe, published on University of California Press, 2014. So you're part of the University of California even before you came here in the department. And this book, all part of the master plan. And this book examines the cultural history of post-war Europe through the lens of the performance and reception of Arnold Schoenberg's work, A Survivor from Warsaw. This is Professor Calico's second year here at UCLA as her colleague, and other colleagues in the room would agree that she's made an incredible impact on our school and our department already. We're so grateful that you're here with us, and let's join in welcoming Professor Joy Calico.
Thank you for the invitation, Mark, and for the very kind introduction. It is nice to see so many of you here, even though some of you are here because they're getting something out of it. I hope other people will also get something out of it, but it's great to see all of you here. I feel a little bit like if you know Schoenberg's book, The Harmonie Lehre, he starts it by saying, "This book I have learned from my students," and there's something to that in what I'm talking about today. The West Coast premiere of Todd Machover's opera Schoenberg in Hollywood prompted me to think again about a topic I've pondered off and on for several years now, which is the representations of Jewishness in opera. Of course, one could ask this question of any representational medium, film, theater, painting, but I think the answers are qualitatively different in the realm of opera. The operatic ecosystem is a different art world, to invoke Howard Becker's construction, and there are conventions specific to opera, specifically the function and importance of music, both song and instrumental, that work very differently in opera than they do in other genres. If we go through all the dramaturgical functions of this multimodal genre, we can ask, what do Jewish operatic characters sound like? What does the orchestra sound like when it accompanies them? What words are they uttering? How do they look? What are they wearing? How do they behave? What's their role in the plot? Is some aspect of their Jewish identity important to the plot? Or, to reframe the question, how is a character's Jewishness expressed by the composer in the music, the librettist in the words and plot, the director in the concept and staging, the costume set and lighting by their designers, and finally in the embodied and invoiced rendering of the performer? As with all characterizations, context and contrast are key. Is a Jewish character set in contrast to non-Jewish characters? Is he or she shown to belong to a group? Is the milieu understood to be hostile? Finally, I heard an opera director say recently that all opera communicates in stereotypes. Well, are these stereotypes anti-Semitic? A few years ago, I had the great good fortune to spend a semester at the University of Toronto as the Gerstein Visiting Distinguished Professor at the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies and the Faculty of Music. And they asked me to design a new course that I could teach to both their musicology and Jewish studies graduate students. And that course was Representations of Jewishness in Opera Since 1900. This gave me the opportunity to work with some brilliant colleagues, both faculty and students there, and much of what you'll hear today emerged in my conversations and those classes. I'm grateful to Mark Kligman and the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience for the invitation and the opportunity to return to this project once again. So in this talk, I'll lay out the categories we developed for working with repertoire according to general theme that allowed us to bring some very disparate repertoire into dialogue with one another, bring what I suspect will be some new repertoire to your attention, and then focus on a few key examples across history, particularly from the 20th and 21st centuries, culminating in Schoenberg and Hollywood as part of that history. I need to acknowledge a couple of earlier examples to set the stage. Carol Clark's work on Haydn's operas has shown that the patron Prince Nicholas had a penchant for opera buffa and comedy redolent of Jewish caricature. In the 18th century, she argues, quote, Jews were character types, like young lovers or old fathers, but they were the only character types identified by race or religion. The Apothecary, as you see here, is from 1768, and of this she says, quote, the Apothecary demonstrates many of the same cultural resonances, bodily features, social afflictions, and gestures that are associated with Jews in the dramatic works of Wagner and Richard Strauss. That these same cultural stereotypes were present in the 18th century and known to Haydn, she argues, who in turn knew how to employ musical pictorialisms and exploit vocal technique in order to make explicit the stereotype, is at the heart of her research. I'm going to avoid Wagner, just so you know. It's just a lot to unpack in a short talk. The opera that cemented Verdi's reputation on this topic, that cemented Verdi's reputation as a serious talent to be reckoned with, is the story of King Nebuchadnezzar. The opera follows the plight of the Israelites as they are assaulted, conquered, and subsequently exiled from their homeland by the Babylonian king Nabucco in Italian. The historical events are used as backdrop for romantic and political plot, as is typical for Verdi. It's based on the biblical books of 2 Kings, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and Daniel. And its famous chorus for the Israelites, Va Pensiero, took on a mythical significance in the Italian Risorgimento unification movement. And that picture to the side is the original costume design for Nabucco. That may be a tune that you've heard before. In the course at Toronto, we came up with a taxonomy, if you will, that would allow us to organize our research for the class. And I'll just give a few examples for each one. We also thought about how significant the Jewish identity was in each case. Does it drive the plot? Is it incidental? Obviously, there is some overlap here, but thinking along these lines helped us organize ourselves contextually. Finally, we also considered the language. Some in Hebrew, mostly by Israeli composers, some in Yiddish, mostly from Israel, but also American composers. A lot in English, having to do with the diasporic patterns, we think, and some in German, having to do with the Jewish presence in German-speaking Central Europe and the phenomenon of coming to terms with the past. The choice to compose an opera in Hebrew and or Yiddish stakes a claim to a different type of representation that I won't discuss today, but I do want to acknowledge some of this repertoire that could use further investigation. This is just a list. It's to get you started. It's not meant to be comprehensive. This is to say nothing of the phenomenon of the Yiddish operetta, and here I would refer to you for example, to Michael Ochs's 2017 critical edition of Joseph Rumshinsky's Die Goldene Kala, composed in 1923. As far as genre goes, we operated on the premise that if the creators call it an opera, then we treat it as an opera. The Frank London example that you see over here at the bottom is particularly intriguing. It's a Yiddish-Cuban opera that premiered in Havana. So that's something I'm hoping somebody else will do some work on, because that would be worth knowing about. Now, in terms of folklore, the golem is a mythological creature typically depicted in clay or stone and brought to life by mystical ritual. Some of these you can research in the Milken Archive of Jewish Music. Some of these have been recorded there. Another in this category is the Dybbuk. Ansky's play inspired several musical settings, including a chamber piece by Aaron Copland and a ballet by Leonard Bernstein. The Dybbuk is a malevolent wandering spirit that enters and possesses the body of a living person until exorcised. I'll show a short clip from the Solomon Epstein version in which the soprano becomes possessed by the tenor, I can hardly think of a worse fate, and sings with his voice. This is her voice. And now she's a tenor. Okay, so if we think in the political category, I'm going to call attention to a few examples that are often referred to as CNN operas, talking about things based on true events and often in very recent history. The Death of Klinghoffer is kind of the third rail in this topic, premiered in 1991 in Europe, and based on events that associated with the 1985 hijacking of a cruise ship by Palestinian terrorists who ultimately executed a Jewish tourist named Leon Klinghoffer. I would say that our colleague Bob Fink has probably written the definitive take on this opera and its controversy. He wrote, quote, "New York audiences reacted vehemently not so much to an ideological position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to specific nuances in the satirical portrayal of American Jewish characters and one controversial scene that has been cut from the opera." So in other words, if you see it today, you won't see the scene that brought about the controversy. This scene must be read closely and in relation to specifically American Jewish questions of ethnic humor, assimilation, identity, and multiculturalism in mass media. End quote. The second example here is a piece by the Israeli-American composer Chaya Chernovin, of whom more later, a commission that asked her to compose new material to interweave with the fragments that remain of Mozart's juvenile work, Zaida. The Mozart piece is a tale of two European slaves who fall in love and are imprisoned in a Turkish sultan's prison. This is not unusual for the vogue of all things Turkish in Mozart's day. Chernovin interweaves with this original scenes of forbidden love between an Israeli and a Palestinian. And the third option there is a chamber opera from 2019 by Adam Machover and Jonathan Levy entitled The Sleeping Thousand, which I saw at Aix-en-Provence a few years ago. Michal Grover-Friedlander, a scholar based in Tel Aviv, writes, quote, "It refashions the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as a futuristic sci-fi political fantasy. Adopting a critical and satirical perspective, the opera develops an absurd imaginative state of affairs out of which a utopian and dystopian situation unfolds." Now, in terms of the biblical category, we have several contenders in this one. I'm going to just focus on a couple of landmarks from the 20th century that are worth knowing for our conversation today. So Richard Strauss's Salome, which is based on Oscar Wilde's play but derived from the Gospels according to Matthew and Mark in the New Testament, and Schoenberg's Moses and Aaron, derived from the book of Exodus, chapters 3 through 23, found in both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. Strauss based the opera on Wilde's play and followed parts of the text very closely, including the portion we'll look at today. Salome, as the students here well know, was a teenage Jewish girl in a very unhealthy home environment. Her stepfather lusts after her openly, her mother does not intervene sufficiently, and she has an effect on all the men at court that she recognizes but does not completely understand. All the adults in her life have failed her. A lot has been said about her as a Middle Eastern exotic fetish. Strauss said that the part is composed for a 16-year-old girl with the voice of Isolde. I'm here to tell you that is a physical impossibility. This is an image of Maria Vitic, the singer who created the role of Salome, and refused to perform herself the dance of the seven veils. This began a tradition of having a dancer as a body double in that scene. Anna Seshadri has argued that the original audience, this would have been in Dresden in 1905, understood this as a Judenoper, a Jewish opera, and that Salome serves as a metaphor for the Jewish question. In a famous article entitled Strauss, the Pervert, an Avant-Garde Opera in the Fin de Siècle, Sander Gilman writes, quote, "Strauss's work was criticized as the product of sick homosexual or Jewish artists. In fact, he intended this piece mainly for a Jewish avant-garde audience, portraying the Jewish characters by a howling cacophony of sound or a comic quintet of 4 high tenors and a bass, reflecting current views of the Jew as feminine or sexually perverted. These references were acceptable to self-hating German Jewish audiences who projected them onto Eastern Jews, not identifying it with themselves," end quote. So let's take a look at the quintet that he's talking about. In the very opening scene of Strauss's opera, we are scarcely 1 minute into the action when a pair of soldiers hear some quarreling off stage, and one of them says, "What a commotion! Who is that howling now like jackals in the desert?" And his colleague says, "The Jews never change. They quarrel about religion all the time." It's part of setting the scene of the action to come. Herodias is also going to complain about them being argumentative, which is a common stereotype and related to Ruth Hacohen's work on the historical tracing of the noise libel against Jews. It's also foreshadowing. Early in scene 4, some 45 minutes later, the crucial decision is about to be reached. Herod is about to bribe his stepdaughter to dance for him by offering her anything she wants. The tension is rising between him and his wife, Salome's mother, who is fully aware that he leers at her all the time. Herodias also makes fun of him for being intimidated by John the Baptist, whom he describes as a holy man. The narrative trajectory takes a detour when a group of characters identified only as Jew 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 react to Herod's statement by engaging in just the type of argument the soldiers discussed at the opera's beginning. I have the text here so you're not distracted by wondering what they're saying in German, but the real point is to listen to the voices. Think about their range, the tessitura, the pace at which they speak, and the way they interact. Herodias cuts them off. Strauss wrote in a letter to Stefan Zweig that he set this up according to the rule of contrast. He says, I wanted to compose the virtuous John the Baptist in Salome as more or less a fool. For me, a preacher in the desert who also feeds on locusts has something indescribably comedic about him. He counteracted him with a parody, he says, of the 5 Jews and also constructed Herod as a caricature. These are all his words. In other words, Strauss says that all of these characters are set up as parodies in contrast to one another. In the quintet we just heard, the characters are argumentative and shrill, the combination of 4 tenors and a bass is absurd, and they talk over one another until Herodias screams at them to stop. The second biblical example is from Schoenberg's Moses and Aaron. It's a 12-tone opera written mostly between 1926 and 1932. He returned to it repeatedly until his death in 1951, but never composed the music for the 3rd act. So today, if you see it performed, it's typically just rendered as unaccompanied spoken dialogue in the 3rd act between Moses and Aaron. Richard Begum has argued that leaving Act 3 incomplete reveals that Moses' triumph must mean the suppression of the sensuous and therefore the suppression of music itself. I would argue that it has been suppressed throughout the opera, at least for Moses, which we take to be the right side of this argument. In fact, I believe that Schoenberg set himself an impossible task: to use the opera genre, which is arguably defined by the pleasures of spectacle and singing, as a vehicle for demonstrating that representation, the image, and sensuality cannot be trusted. Here I am indebted still to more work by Ruth Cohen, particularly her chapter, The Prohibition of Images and Operatic Iconoclasm, a view from Jewish traditions and the history of opera. I'll show this text because the score and video clip to follow don't have English translations. This is the first time the brothers are shown together in the opera, and notice that their dialogue is all about image, picture, the unimaginable, the unimaged, vision. It all gets at the central question of image and representation. And what I'll ask you to think about as we listen and watch the clip is how this is set up sonically and the contrast between their 2 voices, and what the timbre of each voice symbolizes. Aaron is an operatic tenor, the voice type best suited for the persuasive salesman he must be when he convinces the Israelites to worship the golden calf while Moses is away on Mount Sinai receiving the commandments. In the operatic economy, as we know from Caroline Abate and others, the singing voice trumps all else. So Moses, who is not supposed to be susceptible to earthly pleasures, does not sing. He performs in Sprechstimme, which for Schoenberg was a pitched and expressive type of heightened speech. It's a sound that stoically and ascetically refuses to give in to the operatic pleasure of singing, as Aaron does. It's as if the operatic voice, with its resonant formant and ringing tone, is somehow transubstantiated into image, and the alchemy required to translate this dilemma to the opera genre. That's Moses. And this is Aaron entering from the audience. That gives you a sense of the contrast between them. When it comes to the Shoah, I want to focus on Chernovin's example, which is really about the aftermath, the generational trauma of the Shoah, not representing the Shoah proper. If Schoenberg wrestles with the problem of the singing voice in his opera and what that connoted about the primary characters, Israeli American composer Chaya Chernovin retains the singing voice but removes the words, so that we have no semantic content as a way of writing an opera that treats the inability to communicate about Holocaust trauma. Before we do that, though, I want to just call your attention to a couple of others on this theme, just to give you a sense of the range of possibility. One of these is an opera for children, children as an audience, not performers, that is set in the Holocaust based on the bestseller The Boy in Striped Pajamas. The renowned composer Shulamit Ron has a 2022 opera based on the Diary of Anne Frank. And Ricky Ian Gordon's chamber opera 27, which is about Gertrude Stein and Alice Toklas and the salon they cultivated in Paris, includes a kind of waking nightmare in which Stein is tormented by questions about what she, a Jewish woman, did to help Holocaust victims from the safety of her expat salon life in Paris. Chernovin's opera is a chamber piece in 3 scenes without words. Both the Hebrew title and the German mean inwards. It's inspired by the 1986 novel Sea Under Love by the Israeli author David Grossman. The story is about an old man, a Holocaust survivor, and a child named Momek. They do not communicate, even by touch. Eventually, the child tries to learn the old man's story, and a timid type of exchange begins. The opera deals with individual memories of the Holocaust and the continuing trauma, but also the release that can come with passing on those memories to subsequent generations. Chernovin has said this about Grossman's book. She says, "It opens something in Israeli literature that needed to be said. We are second generation to the Holocaust. This story has never been told because the story of our parents, the Holocaust survivors, was so much more important. We were told by our parents, we are the Jews of the Holocaust. We have a certificate of suffering you will never get." Grossman gave us, this generation that never had a certificate of suffering, a voice and showed the other side of this paradigm. And here I'd call your attention to Emil Wadarsky's work on this opera in the context of the ongoing debate about abstraction versus representation and portrayals of the Holocaust. For Chernovin, this is an attempt to create a different kind of music theater. It has no libretto, no plot, only mental situations, no singers who are actors, non-verbal, non-narrative experience. You have 2 primary performers on stage who don't speak or sing, and there are vocal and instrumental soloists on the wings on stage right and left. What you see here at the top is the vocal part for the offstage women. And you'll see here that all they're singing is phonemes, vowels, and consonants, that there is no actual semantic content to what they say. So when I found the only version of this I could find online, and my DVD is not functional, I could not embed that. So I'm going to just show a clip of this to give you some idea of what this looks like or sounds like. So this is the old man, one side of the stage. Those are offstage singers. And child enters. So as you can hear there are no words. Everything is sound effects for the voices and the instruments. Now, if we come to the biographical, and this is where we'll get into Machover's Schoenberg in Hollywood, I do want to call your attention to a couple of pieces you may not know. First one is Harvey Milk. This is about, yes, it's about the life of a politician and gay activist in San Francisco, but the 1995 version also uses the Kaddish as a frame for the opera. It's newly revised. The premiere of this new version starts the end of this month in San Francisco, so I don't know if this is still the case. So his Jewishness may not be the defining feature of this operatic character, but it is important to the way he's presented in the story. I feel like I can't make any operatic presentation without talking about Kaya Sariaho. Her 2006 opera oratorio, The Passion of Simona, in which she unpacks, among other things, Simona Weil's complex relationship to the Judaism of her birth and her Christian leanings through a structure of 15 movements modeled after the Stations of the Cross, thus drawing a connection to Christ's passion. In this opera, Schoenberg's Jewishness is central to the story because this is, after all, a biography, albeit a fantastical telling of one. When you go to the performance, you'll read the program notes written by Joe Honor, who participated in Tuesday's panel that Catherine moderated for us. Joe draws a connection to Schoenberg's opera Moses and Aaron that we just saw, and the ways in which Schoenberg seems to have understood himself as the Moses figure in that scenario. He says, throughout Schoenberg in Hollywood, Machover interweaves the defining dramatic opposition between the characters of Moses and Aaron, with Moses tasked to be God's prophet but unable to find the words, and Aaron blessed with the ability to communicate but lacking a vision of the infinite. Honor's point is that there may have been more Aaron in Schoenberg than we think. This opera is also a chamber opera. There are 3 singers. The person who performs the role of Schoenberg is always only Schoenberg, and then you have a male and a female who play many, many different roles, transformed mostly through costumes to suit each scenario that comes up. To my mind, there are 2 dramaturgical points that will help you understand this opera if it's your first encounter with it. First, the story unfolds through a combination of simultaneous live operatic performance and original film. These 2 media combine to tell a version of Schoenberg's life story in a kind of biopic with artistic license that is also mapped onto a history of film. In other words, the use of film is not an enhancement or a director's aesthetic choice. The medium is the message in this case. This is reminiscent of operas by Michel Vandera, in which the fixed medium of film is essential to telling the story, or the very popular production of The Magic Flute by the British production company 1927, in which the show consists of a series of Weimar-era style cartoon projections, and the performers have to fit themselves into very, very precise blocking so that they will fit into the scenes that are being displayed all around them. Secondly, the film clips and the music are both replete with quotations, homages, allusions, and references to extant film and music, all embedded in Machover's own visual and sonic aesthetic. I think bearing these 2 things in mind will help you navigate the experience, which can sometimes feel like a kaleidoscopic fever dream. The opera's storyline is prompted by a meeting between 2 characters, each of whom can be said to represent a prominent type of Central European Jewish transplant living in LA in the 30s and 40s. One is Schoenberg, having recently fled Nazism in Europe and now making a new life for his young family in Los Angeles, like many others who were fortunate enough to leave. The other is Irving Thalberg, born in Brooklyn to German Jewish immigrants, became the head of MGM Studios and the most powerful player in the film industry. In the libretto, they refer to their different Jewish experiences in a matter-of-fact manner. This meeting did actually take place. The topic was the possibility of Schoenberg writing the music for the film The Good Earth. This did not come to pass for a variety of reasons, including unprecedented demands for artistic control and a sum of money that would make John Williams blush. The meeting ends with Thalberg saying, "We'll find a place for your music, Arnold. Think about it." And Schoenberg says, "I'll think about it." And the thinking about it sets off a kind of "This is your life, Arnold Schoenberg" retrospective that goes through major events in his life in Europe and the United States. Fantasies about the film business, references to classic films and film genres abound. Audience members with a keen eye will recognize allusions to horror, film noir, rom-com musicals, screwball comedy, westerns, and even animation through the use of filmic techniques, cinematic font, costumes, and lighting. The musical quotations include numerous references to Schoenberg's own music, as well as references to songs made famous by their association with film, such as A Time Goes By, the song performed by the character of Sam in Casablanca in 1942, and Singing in the Rain from the 1952 musical film that appeared in a scene called The Schoenberg, it appears in the opera, in a scene called The Schoenberg Follies, A Bad Review, spelled as a pun, R-E-V-U-E, since the scene is about the bad critical reviews his music is getting in the Viennese press. And the scene plays out Schoenberg singing, I'm killing tonal music, I'm killing tonal music. So this is the type of thing that will show up here. And much later, as Schoenberg and Gertrude make their way to the West Coast dressed as cowboys, you'll hear Happy Trails to You in the background. So I just want to outline a couple of scenes so you kind of know what you're getting into. The film clips by Peter Torpy that you'll see here, and this is from the Boston production, are the same as is the music, but some of the staging is necessarily different in the Nimoy just because of the space and configuration that's available. So this is a pivotal point. We've talked about this if you've been in class with me from 1908 when his first wife, Matilda, cheats on him with a mutual friend, the painter Richard Gerstel. In this scene, this moment is enacted by the live performers on stage as well as their doppelgangers on film. And Schoenberg plays the role of a detective in a film noir treatment of the scene. And that's Schoenberg playing detective. Lovers. Now I'll counter with a couple that are specifically about his Jewish experiences. The first is the episode Matzeh, the spa town where he was vacationing with his family in 1921, when he experienced his most overt discrimination to date. Town officials told him that only Christians could be there, could swim in the lake. He said, well, I am a Christian, but I don't have my baptismal card on me. And they forced him and his family to leave. This is an example in which the live performers impersonate a slapstick Marx Brothers routine. Remember, the Marx Brothers were also Jewish, born to German and French Jewish immigrants in New York City. And in this part, we don't see film because the live performers are recreating that homage themselves. This is Schoenberg in his swimming costume.
Just a modern composer go to get a swim round here.
There's no swimming here.
What's that lake doing there?
It's doing nothing.
Can I swim in it?
That depends. Can you swim?
Sure.
When we are from the town council, today is a Christians only. You are Christian?
Sure.
And the last example, I'll show a little bit of the scene in which their happily married life in Berlin is interrupted by the declaration of the Civil Servants Act, which required all Jewish employees to leave their positions. So note how the use of the Bach quotation and a newsreel-style film clip mark this moment of rupture between the German musical heritage of which he felt himself to be such a part and the reality of the contemporary political moment.
Meanwhile, in Germany, on Herr Hitler's instructions, all Jewish professors of music at the renowned Berlin Academy are to be dismissed, to, as he says, break the Jewish stranglehold on Western music. The most eminent Arnold Schoenberg has made his way to Paris.
How to situate this in the brief history I've sketched of the representations of Jewishness on the operatic stage. To my mind, it is these two dramaturgical strategies I identified above that distinguish it from its predecessors. Although that's not to say that these strategies could not be used to tell other stories. I'm not claiming that this kind of double media interface, rife with both visual and sonic intertextuality, both of which are integral to the storytelling, is a distinctively Jewish dramaturgy. Although I can also imagine someone building on what Ernst Bloch, another German Jewish immigrant, wrote in 1939 about the nature of the exile experience, that it is a doubled rather than divided experience. I hope this brief sketch gives you some things to ponder when we see you at the opera next week. Thank you. Are there questions?
Thanks so much, Joy, as always, for a fascinating talk.
Hi, Daniela.
Hi. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the differences you've perceived in representation of Jewish characters in contexts where where the characters are all Jewish, and contexts in which some characters are Jewish and some are not.
And again, this will again be a little bit of a broad stroke. When the characters are all Jewish, as in the scene, for example, as you'll see in the scene between Schoenberg and Thalberg, they are talking like two friends. There's nothing, they talk about their respective Jewish experiences, but there's nothing that marks their behavior, their dress, what they're saying. There's nothing about their vocalism that is supposed to read as Jewish. So I think it is, it's where you have it set up as a contrast. Thinking about, if you're trying to set up a Jew as a Jewish character the way Carol Clark talks about, setting it up as different from everybody else in the environment, that it's very easy to fall back on these types of stereotypes. So I think you're exactly right. If it's a milieu in which everyone is Jewish, and this is one of the things in the scene that has since been cut from the death of Klinghoffer. It opens with a domestic scene of a Jewish family, and there's a kind of a familiar, Fink talks about it as a kind of a familiar, convivial, comic interaction with Jewish family members, and that some people read that as a negative Jewish stereotype, whereas other people thought, no, actually, this is exactly how my family acts. And so this is a question of, who is this being presented for? And again, within the group by itself, they behaved very differently than they do later in other scenes in the opera. So I do think it's part of what Strauss says about setting up the contrast. How important is the contrast in any given scenario? And how much does it matter that the person is Jewish in that scenario? Oh, there's somebody here and there. Yes.
Hi, Joy. Thank you so much for your talk. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Molly.
I was very intrigued by the idea of Strauss's Salome possibly having an intention towards an audience that likely is exhibiting maybe some internalized anti-Semitism. I'm wondering if you've come across that further in operas, especially operas perhaps written by artists with a Jewish positionality, if you've found that, or if they found themselves that there's a kind of tendency to lean into an internalized anti-Semitism at all.
It's a good question. That's Sandra Gilman's interpretation of that scene, which is not without its critics, but it has become very prominent. I mean, if you don't do this on your school computer, but if you Google, pervert and Strauss, this is the kind of thing that will come up. It is, Strauss is a complicated question, not as hard to unpack as Wagner, obviously, but There was a point in his career when he was considered philo-Semitic, far too pro-Jewish, and the audience's response to him could be very different from one place to another. I think in Berlin there was the suspicion that he was too pro-Jewish. So it's I have not looked for that in other places, but it seems entirely possible that that could be the case. We tried, and again, these projects came out of work I did with these students primarily, thinking about not trying to play whack-a-mole with instances of anti-Semitism, to think about, okay, let's look at all of these operas and figure out, can we find patterns that don't necessarily have to be anti-Semitic? Are there other ways of engaging with that identity and reading it to that end? But I'm quite sure, I'm not sure. I would guess that's not the only one. David, did you have something?
I guess a two-part question. First of all, in Chaya Chernovin's opera, is there Jewishness in these characters, or are they just Jewish? And of course, that applies to other operas as well. But also, a second question, I'm thinking, for example, of falsettos. Do you want to say something about the difference between musicals and operas?
I will say again that if the artist called it an opera, that's what we decided to, that's how we treated it. So yes, there is definitely a difference in expected standard vocal production in opera. Falsetto is more or less the purview of various types of countertenors.
I meant the musical.
The musical.
The musical, the falsetto.
Jews playing bass.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were talking about voice types, not the musical. No, but it sounds like you have a thought.
No, sorry. No, I don't know. It just occurs to me. There's a musical about Jews.
Yes.
Sorry,
I thought you were talking about voice types. Okay.
I get it. So I just wonder, is there Jewishness there? And similarly about many of these operas. Clearly there is Jewishness in Salome.
Right.
Right, and not just Jewish characters.
Right. In the Chernovin examples, it is particularly in the second example, the in the Innere, the inwards, it is more, my read of this is that it is presumed to be Jewishness because it is about generational Holocaust trauma. That is the obvious read. I also think that her musical language may not lend itself to conspicuous markers of Jewishness the way other composers might. That would be my take on that. And the other one, the Zaida Adama, is really a political statement. It's really about forbidden love along political lines that is grafted onto the Turkishness of the Mozart piece.
Hi. I just have to say, not to be overly contentious here, but from the point of view of someone who's actually done the fourth Jew as well as Herod, as well as Narabot, and performed all three roles, not on the same night. The notion that the four Jews are the five Jews, and by the way, remember, the fifth Jew is low, and he's calm and easy. He has one sort of little outburst, but mostly it's slow and low. Mm-hmm. The quintet is something, along with, say, the ride of the Valkyries in Act 3 of Die Walküre and the Meistersinger quintet, Meistersinger mob scene in Act 2 of Meistersinger. This is something, if you're in a production of this, you rehearse it every performance before the show. The notion that it is somehow perverted and effeminate sounds to me like there is a whole suitcase that's being brought into that discussion that is just from the wrong flight. I'm sorry. If you are in that thing, you're not sitting around saying, oh, this is by Oscar Wilde, I'm so effeminate and perverted. No, you're saying this is hard as shit. Okay. This is insanely annoying, and it is composed to be annoying, and it's composed kind of to make you hurt as a performer.
And in the audience, I would say. Yeah.
And it is really, really annoying.
It is.
And
I think that's what he's getting at, is the parody.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So
it is very annoying.
I don't get that other thing at all.
Okay.
Maybe it's just me being dumb, but
no, I think as I say, that is maybe an infamous part of the scholarship attached to this piece, but it has, there's a lot of ink spilled over it. Yes. Yeesh.
Hi, I want to go back to the Chernovin for just a minute, and I just think it's really interesting that she's Israeli-American and it's generational trauma, and when we think of generational trauma, I immediately think of Art Spiegelman and Maus, and that's distinctly an American, and so I guess my question is, do you think this is a distinctly Israeli presentation of it? Because, I mean, they have, like, you know, Yom HaShoah in Israel, and the sirens go off, and everyone gets out of their cars, and you have that pause, and I think it's quite different than, like, this wouldn't necessarily be written by an American, I think. So I guess, yeah, is this a presentation of a distinctly Israeli generational trauma?
I think so, and I think she would say that as well. I think she's quite, when she talks about the importance of Goodman's book, you know, that it's, and she's given a lot, she's talked about this in interviews, that it was, you know, we were the, you know, something like, you know, if I fell and skinned my knee and I'm crying about it, my mother's like, oh, you think that hurts? You should see what happened to me. And this is, you know, it was like there was never a chance to, you could never take up space in that environment. And it seems to have been, from her perspective, much worse in some ways in Israel because the expectations are so intense. Yeah. So I don't know, you know, she's been in the United States a long time now, so I don't know if this is something she would have written had she still been in Israel. But I do know her music doesn't get played much in Israel. I think the new music scene there is a very different aesthetic, quite apart from these two examples, yeah, topically.
How would you say Jewish identity in operas differed pre and post World War II and the Holocaust?
Some of the same stereotypes persist. For example, Tony Shepard has written extensively about exoticism that persists in operas by John Adams, particularly, although he talks about other composers very popular in the 80s and the 90s, for example, that some of the same tropes persist. I think there are a couple of things going on there. I think one is that just by nature of how long it takes to sing and develop a story in music, that there is a lot of shorthand. A lot of things have to be conveyed very quickly in an opera. That in a novel you can take 3 pages to describe or unpack, and so there's a lot of shorthand in terms of costuming, slang, you know, all sorts of things that can read very quickly to an audience. But I think much of it persists. I think I mean, certainly you would not see stories specifically about the Shoah before that. But I think much of it remains the same. The vocabulary remains the same.
Hi, Professor. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned Verdi's opera, and you were discussing the caricatures of Jews in Opera Buffo, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just curious because you mentioned distinctly that it was the only character based upon race. And especially for that era of kind of like white American Protestant or Catholics in Europe, they're not exactly an open-minded group. And I was wondering if you had any inclinations or looked into maybe why Jews or how Jews became that kind of caricature, especially from a racial perspective, like why that was the character that came up.
The Haydn example? Yeah, so I am not a Haydn expert, as everyone here can attest, or will when this is over. But it is, Carol Clark's position is that there are all sorts of stereotypes that play into opera buffa. You know, the love interest will be a tenor. He will be kept from the soprano by a baritone who's either his dad or her brother. You know, this kind of scenario. And she says, from going through Haydn's operas, and I don't know them very well, so I've only seen 2, I think, is that the only stereotype from that period of opera buffa that is marked comically by both race and or religion is the Jewish stereotype. And I mean, if I had to get, I feel bad if Carol ever sees this. She'll be like, don't you remember? I wrote about this. That there are, the Jewish character and caricature is a familiar other in a European setting. It is the other that they are most likely to encounter. And so that can stand in for all sorts of other things. That would be my, and you should read Carol's book. I'm sure it's better explained there. Ray, did you have something?
So I was thinking about who's doing it as being really important, and I was thinking about David's question about musicals and how they can be different. I think politically they're very different. They're being written by Jews, and it's as it's been argued that it's about finding a place in American culture for Jewish humor as something natural and funny. And there's another model, and I think it's blackface minstrelsy, in which something similar happens where those stereotypes are taken over by blacks performing them, and they become something different, still hard to watch, but still the humor comes and becomes different. And I think it's similar to what happens between the Strauss and the first song tradition in Fiddler on the Roof, where something very similar is happening. Because when you accumulate all the voices, they're not paying any attention to each other. The counterpoint is all over the place, and yet it's somehow interesting to us, even if it can be painful. Both are kind of painful. At least they give you the word tradition to bring it all together in tradition. So I wonder if there's something about that threshold of this, and whether the argument that Gilman makes is about there's a way in which that is meant to be understood with recognition and humor, and not simply as this is horrible, and the Jews are being portrayed horribly.
No, I think you're right, that he does, and he says it was for an audience that would recognize themselves, and that, that's what he says. I don't know enough about that specific context, Dresden Opera audience in 1905, to know if that is in fact true. But that is Gilman's take on it. But you're absolutely right. It does. As you say, it makes a difference who's making the art, who plays the character. All of that is crucial to it. And the comic, I think your point about musicals, and sorry, David, that I did not pick up what you put down earlier, about using the musical as finding a place and a space, particularly in American culture, is absolutely relevant. The institutional trajectories of opera and musicals and operetta have tended to track very differently in this country, so it's harder for me to speak with authority to that because I know mostly the other institution, but it does seem to be a different environment, both in terms of the creative teams and the audience perception of them. Are we done? Okay. Oh, sorry.
So I was wondering, so we mentioned stereotypes in opera, and another guy asked a question about how it changed like pre-World War II, and I really want to focus on the Third Reich. I know we skipped over Wagner, and I wonder how like operas like Salome kind of like contributed in like setting like a stereotype that the Third Reich reproduced, I guess, in a sense, because I noticed that the Sapphire figure is very, let's say, for the lack of a better word, a pervert. So that kind of perpetuates the stereotype that Jews are either sexually voracious or obsessed with money, which I think is reflected in the Nosferatu and the Nuremberg laws. So how do you think those like pre-works, like let's say Wagner's journals and like works like Salome, contributed to building the stereotypes of Jews?
I would say, and as I have told people in class, that the Holocaust is not Wagner's fault. The perpetrators, or if you want to think about Hitler specifically, found in Wagner things that resonated with his own agenda. But it is not, I do not think this is Wagner's fault. However, there are stereotypes that continue to play during the Third Reich and get even more traction because, again, it becomes a feedback loop. This is something This is something that I recognize that reinforces all these stereotypes I already have. So I wouldn't say those things are not relevant, but I would not give them more credit than they probably deserve. It's maybe correlation more than causation, if that makes sense. All right, thank you.
So again, thank you to Joy Calico for a wonderful lecture. We hope that you're all encouraged to see Schoenberg in Hollywood. We have the QR codes here for you to scan for free general admission tickets. Again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.